Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad that we can gather here today. My name is Uyan Kim. I'm one of the pastors here at Mars Park United Methodist Church, and I've been granted the privilege of introducing my friend Jonathan. Just a quick story. My wife has been reading a book in her small group through our church, and in this book, Jonathan is quoted just about every chapter. And she asked, hey, this guy named Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove went to Duke Divinity School. Did you know him? And I told her, actually, I know him quite well, I think. We went to school together. We started together at Duke Div in 2003. We were in spiritual formation class together through our first year, had most of our classes together through our core curriculum, to which my wife then asked, so what's wrong with you? Why aren't you more like him? You've not written any books. I told her, I'm trying, honey. I'm really trying. For those of you who may know, yesterday, October 22nd, Eugene Peterson finished his course in faith to enter God's kingdom eternal. One of his favorite books is Long Obedience in the Same Direction. If you've not read that, I recommend that to you. When I think of Jonathan, I think of that. The years that I've known him, 15 years now, I think of him as someone who has gone a long way from the first day that I've ever met him to obey God as he journeyed with God all of these years. He challenges all of us, the pastors, the clergies, to expand the boundaries of our pastoral imagination while awakening our hope for the world, despite what we may see to be so broken and sinful. When Jonathan possesses hope, that gives me hope. Because if someone like him can possess hope, then I can too. He challenges all of us to redefine the health and wealth gospel while moving us toward lives rooted in God's justice and mercy, to welcome strangers at my door. We are grateful that he's here with us. We are grateful that you are here with us tonight. Will you pray with me? Spirit of the living God, open our ears so that we may hear one another. Silence the distractions around us so that we may be fully present here and now. Humble our hearts so that we may be transformed. Enable us to receive all that you have in store for us tonight. In your name we pray. Amen.
So I'm Greg Gerald from QC Family Tree. I'll stand up so you can see me for just a second. And I want to tell you just briefly about this odd setup that we have in the room tonight. We call this a fishbowl. And the idea here is that transformation takes place usually in circles, not with us as passive consumers of information for Jonathan to feed us, but with us working together towards finding a path towards freedom. And so you'll see there's a couple of things that are going on here. For one, you're in a slightly different arrangement than you usually are, so hopefully the position of your body, the way that you're looking, the sight lines will create maybe a slight bit of discomfort to open up the pathways for listening a little better. But also you'll notice that there's some seats that are empty in the middle in the center circle here. And so what's going to happen is that we're going to give Jonathan a few minutes to speak, about 20 minutes or so, and he's got some words for us. And then at that point, I'm going to interrupt him if he's still going on, and we're going to let you know that these seats are open, and that you, of course, as participants, have the freedom to come and move into one of them and to grab one of these microphones and to participate in the conversation that's going on. So you could speak to Jonathan in the form of a question, in the form of a response. as the facilitator, I'll sort of reserve the right to cut you off at some point if we need to, but we want to make this conversational, and so it's important for you to know that you have the freedom to move yourself into this inner circle and to join this conversation, not just to sit and passively take it in. All right? So welcome to the Fishbowl. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Sir.
It's so good to be in this bowl with you all. And ever since our youngest son came back from the church, went to the fair last year, the state fair up in Raleigh, and you know, you can win the little fish, the goldfish at the fair. They come in the little bag, and you never know how long they've been in the bag. But as it happened, all the kids at church got one of these fish, and our little 4-year-old, his was the only one that survived. So we told him we'd put it in another little bowl on the counter, and it just kept living. I didn't think it'd make it a week. So now we actually have a fish tank because at Christmas time, he said since his fish was still alive, he wanted a tank. So I have a little bit of experience with the fishbowl now. As you were describing it, one of the things I was thinking is that, you know, we drop the food in from the top every day, so maybe we can trust some real food to come down. I'd like to begin by singing together, which I think works best if we stand up. Our bodies are instruments. They can sing. This is a song I learned from Bernice Johnson Reagan, one of the great song leaders of the freedom movement, that when we get together, we should be in circles, but we should begin by singing because the point of the song is to get to the singing, and the point of the singing, she says, is to make us into a community. So here's a song from the Freedom Church that we can sing together, and then maybe we can riff on it a little bit as we're talking together and spending time together this evening. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet, Lord, while I run this race. Oh, Lord, guide my feet, Lord, while I run this race. 'Cause I don't want to run this race in vain, race in vain. Hold my hand, hold my hand while I run this race. Oh Lord, hold my hand, Lord, while I run this race. Oh Lord, hold my hand, Lord, while I run this race. 'Cause I don't want to run this race in vain. I'm your child. I'm your child while I run this race. I'm your child, Lord, while I run this race. Oh Lord, I'm your child, Lord, while I run this race. 'Cause I don't want to run this race in vain. Amen. Amen. We might can do something together if we can sing a song like that. Well, I'm happy to get to be here this evening. Earlier this spring, I published this book called Reconstructing the Gospel. The subtitle is Finding Freedom from Slaveholder Religion. I've been talking with lots of different kinds of groups since it came out, but I'm especially interested in the conversations with churches. And I don't know if everybody's part of this particular congregation, but since we're in a church tonight, I thought I would share a little bit with you about what I'm learning from these conversations with churches, and maybe we can talk together about what it means for this church and for the church in Charlotte. You know, in the Bible, they don't call buildings churches. You know, if you ever read it, Paul or whoever in the New Testament's writing, they write to the church at Ephesus or to the church at, Thessalonica. Well, there's a church at Charlotte, whether we're part of it or not. And there's a church at North Carolina and a church in America. And I'm trying to become part of it. So let me begin with a story that had a good bit to do with why I decided I needed to write this book. It's a story that may be similar to an experience that you've had, because I think a lot of people have had these awkward conversations in recent years. We went to see my family. I grew up in Stokes County, North Carolina. If you've never been up there, it's just down the road from Mayberry RFD, you know, where Andy Griffith lived. Well, my people are all from Mayberry, more or less. As a matter of fact, my granny grew up with Andy Griffith. I mean, the real Andy Griffith, not just the make-believe story, the guy who wrote the story. And one of the things we realized in our family is that when Andy went off to Hollywood and told his story, he didn't bother changing all the names in the story. So our family's real claim to fame is that our Uncle Otis made it into the story. If you don't know that story, there's reruns on Nickelodeon all the time. You can follow it. But Otis was the town drunk, and so I was raised by folks up in the hills there in North Carolina, and in the Southern Baptist Church, where we were all teetotalers except for when we weren't, and they taught me to love Jesus and memorize the Bible in the King James Version, because if it was good enough for Jesus, it was good enough for us. And I just grew up in that culture, and it's still very much, I mean, they say the world's turning secular, but it ain't up there. No, everybody knows Jesus. He lives down at the end of the road or somewhere close, to hear people talk. And we just sort of assumed that our whole life was Christian. And well, I was up there for Easter in 2016. Our family drove up from Durham, and our oldest son, who was just becoming a teenager at that time, he's African American. We adopted him, but he's grown up, going out to the country, and knows all the folks up there, and he knows the good things about the country, the mountains we can hike on, and the good foods you can eat, this time of year, the Autumn Leaves Festival, and a good apple cider, and all that good stuff. He's grown up with grandparents who he knows and who know him and love each other and all that. Well, we were all gathered around the table there at my parents' house, and my grandfather, his great-grandfather, was sitting right beside him, and they happened to be right across from me at the table, and we were just kind of getting started with the conversation. And my son looked at my grandfather and said to him, now again, this is Easter of 2016. You might remember that the primaries in the presidential election were happening at that time. There were quite a few Republicans in the field, and there was some discussion about who might be the candidate. But my son said to my grandfather rather directly, "You're not going to vote for Trump, are you, Pa?" To which my grandpa said, "Well, I don't know. I've been watching. You can only vote for Republicans up in King. Nobody ever thinks of voting for anybody else." So that was the only conversation anybody was going to have. So my son interrupted him and said, "But Pa, he's extreme." To which my grandpa didn't really know what to say. And there was a long pause there at the Easter dinner. And it was an awkward pause, a pause that neither of them quite knew what to do with. And so somebody changed the subject and, passed the dressing or whatever, and we moved on. But the pain in the midst of that pause was what stuck with me, and ultimately what led me to write this book, because I knew that that wasn't just our experience. This was the experience that so many people were having and have continued to have in this country, that we are deeply divided by a history that we inherited that we don't entirely understand, and a history that, even when we don't acknowledge it, continues to tell us who we are. And as much as my son knows that his grandfather loves him as much as his grandfather loved him, there was no way that either one of them could understand in that moment where the other was coming from. My son had heard Donald Trump say in his opening speech to the world as a candidate that, Mexicans are rapists, which made absolutely no sense to him. Not because, sort of that kind of political rhetoric was confusing, but because he's grown up going to school with Mexicans his whole life. Islamophobia makes no sense to my son because his best friend is a Muslim from Liberia. They've grown up in the neighborhood together. Like this is just this world that my grandfather fears is not some sort of weird imagination for my son. It's simply the world he lives in. And they couldn't imagine where one another was coming from. I think that I wanted to write this book to make sense of that because I find myself as a preacher in the church, as a person who works in the community, and as someone who engages with the public through writing. I find myself in conversations all the time where this impasse of not understanding why the other person can't imagine where we're coming from is so frequent. And so what I've tried to lay out in the book is my own journey of having grown up in very white and very Christian, in name at least, culture in the South, and realizing how much I didn't even know, right? So a good bit of the first part of the book is about learning to name racial blindness, what we can't see, what we don't know that we don't know. I think this is incredibly important, and just since we're in a church house, one of the ones that came clear for me was when I was in high school, growing up in the Southern Baptist Church. The Southern Baptist Church got into a kind of rift. There was a fight. People were they even argued what to call it. They still argue what to call it. But either the conservatives were returning it to its true order, or they were taking over. And at any rate, what happened to me as a kid growing up in the church is for the first time, I saw people on the news talking about my church. And so I kind of got this outside perspective on who we were. And what they were arguing over at the time, because there was this movement that had started not just in the Southern Baptist Church, but in American public life in reaction against the Equal Rights Amendment, in the mid-1970s, late 1970s, this reaction against the quote-unquote liberalism of people who were, going to change American culture. And this was a very male-dominated movement, and these folks had moved to gain control within the Southern Baptist Church. And by the late 1990s, they had taken control, and they wanted to rewrite now Baptists don't have creeds. We don't have, no creed but the Bible. We grew up on all this. But at any rate, the one thing we did have was this thing called the Baptist Faith and Message. And if you were going to be a missionary for the Baptist Church, if you were going to go out in the name of the Baptist Church, you had to affirm this basic statement of faith, or whatever. The Baptist Faith and Message is what it was called. And what they wanted to add to it was this clause that said that women had to graciously submit to their husbands. Well, this is what they were asking the scholar. I remember him from Wake Forest University. He was on the local news up there where I was growing up. And they asked him about this, and he explained that the passage of Ephesians that they were using to justify this biblical argument for what they wanted to say about women staying in their place, which was also the basis of a whole kind of political movement that they had, riled up to not only take over the denomination, but put the denomination in hand with the Republican Party and create this force that ultimately made Donald Trump president. But that's not the story. But anyway, they wanted to do this all based on this passage from Ephesians, and what this fellow on the TV was pointing out was that was the same passage from Ephesians that the people in the mid-19th century had argued justified the practice of chattel slavery, right? Slaves, submit to your masters is a later passage in that same household table that says, wives, submit to your husbands. And I, in that moment, began to realize that there was a whole way of reading the Bible that was steeped in a movement that had read the Bible specifically against the abolitionists, against the people who had said, if God made all of us, then it's a sin for some of us to own other people. This was a pretty basic and direct argument, and it had begun to gain force in the 1830s, and there was kind of a movement of these abolitionists. It was a moral movement. It was people who were on the basis of their faith and on the basis of a sort of moral sense of what is right and wrong. We're saying that chattel slavery, race-based chattel slavery is wrong. And the response to that by the white church folk, not just Baptists, but Methodists, since we're in a Methodist church, and Presbyterians and others too, was to say, oh, no. We've got some preachers and we've got some Bible scholars who will explain it to you. And I guess as a teenager, what I began to see, this is kind of waking me up from this racial blindness, that wasn't just something that had happened a long time ago, that the way of reading the Bible that had been developed to justify that thing that no one was trying to justify anymore in the 1990s. Nobody was trying to go back to slavery, but they were going to read this Bible the same way to justify the politics that they thought were necessary to maintain the world as they understood it. This racial blindness, I think, is something that over and over again I've realized is a part of the white experience in the world. What is whiteness? Whiteness is this idea that was created along with this justification of owning some other people who, that people tried to say could be owned because their skin was black. What does it mean to be white? This is something that we're just beginning to wrestle with. I remember this circle that we're sitting in tonight. I learned that we need to sit in circles and have these kind of conversations from a member of the Freedom Movement who worked closely with Ella Baker and Dr. King and others in the mid-20th century. His name was Vincent Harding. And Vincent Harding used to ask two questions that I think are incredibly important for us to consider in a space like this tonight. One of the questions he asked was to people who look like me, people who were taught that we're white or that we're supposed to be white. He used to say, what privilege is it to be the inheritor of generations of abuse? We talk about white privilege. But he wanted people who thought they were white to really think about, is it really a privilege? What kind of privilege as a Christian is it to inherit an identity that says you're better than somebody else because of the color of your skin and therefore keeps you from even reading the Bible that you say you want to read to worship your God? Vincent didn't think that was a privilege. And I think we need to keep thinking about that. But the other thing that he always encouraged circles like this to talk about was, what does it mean for us as a people to become a multi-ethnic democracy? Because he always reminded us, this is a relatively new experiment. He said, he was in his 80s when I got to know him, he said, we've only been doing it for about half of my lifetime. You know? To be a society where we actually share power with one another and try to figure out how we can live together. This is a new thing. And this racial blindness makes it incredibly difficult for us. Well, the racial blindness is one thing. And there's, implicit bias tests now that you can go online and take. And we can measure to some degree the way in which our sight, our very way of being in the world and seeing the world is shaped by all of this history. We carry it within us. There's no way you can just lay it down or say, it's like what the church calls sin, right? You learn to name it and confess it, but that don't mean you're done with it. It sticks with you. It's kind of shaped who you are, and we have a lifelong journey of being free from it. But at the same time, I think it's important, and what I try to do in the book is name that how our racial blindness continues to be reinforced by racial habits. Eddie Glaude, who's a professor at Princeton, has done a lot of good work on how systemic racism has been inscribed in racial habits so that you actually don't even have to carry any animus against anyone else to practice systemic racism. You can be a perfectly nice person and perpetuate the basic divisions in our society because it's simply the patterns that we inherited, right? Think about it in terms of wealth disparity. I know Charlotte has had some data recently about the extreme wealth disparity in this city. It isn't just about this city, of course. It's about this nation and the way this nation was founded and the fact that for generations, some people were not only not allowed to acquire property, but were themselves considered property, right? And if you look at the disparities that exist today in light of that history, it's obviously tied. Not just wealth, but also education disparities and health disparities and access to political power. All of these disparities are obviously tied to that history. But you say, but wait. No one's trying to be mean, right? No one's trying to say that black folks are less than. We want equal opportunity. But you can't play the Monopoly game for 2 hours and then invite somebody else to come in and join you and then say, come on, catch up, right? It doesn't work that way, right? There's a way in which if you just play the game by the rules and ask everybody to follow the rules, some people are going to always be stuck starting from zero with less than nothing, as we sometimes say. And so these patterns that just seem normal, that white folks go to church with other white folks, that white folks, by and large, live in neighborhoods with other white folks, send their children to school in places with other white folks. And you ask them, do you believe in segregated schools? Oh, no, never believed in it. No. Nobody believes in segregated schools. We just want our children to have the best education possible. Which means our schools in many places in this country now are more segregated today than they were before desegregation. Because the systems are simply set up that way. And I think when we begin to address the racial blindness that's always there and notice the patterns of these racial habits, the third thing that I try to lay out in the book, largely with stories, is how we begin to see that this shapes our racial politics, right? That politics in America is always about race. Because this is our history, and this is who we are. And this is, you can slice it you can say, no, it's about class. You could say, no, it's about political party. Well, yeah, all those things intersect with race, not just today, but throughout our past. And so this is the inheritance that we have received. And in many ways, it describes the tension that is there in that conversation between my son Jermichael and his grandfather, in that tension that so many of us feel in our society. How do we find freedom from that? That's the basic question I was asking in this book. And the great gift to me has been that, there's all kinds of analytical ways to name this. But the good news, I'm a preacher at the end of the day, the good news is that there have always been people who have interrupted this, right? As much as there is a slaveholder religion, as much as there is a systemic racism that goes all the way back to the founding of this country, there have also been people who have objected, who have said, no, like those abolitionists, same God that made you made me. if God delivered Daniel, surely he'll deliver me, right? I started going out there to the largest plantation in North Carolina at the end of the Civil War was owned by a family called Cameron and has been preserved outside of Durham where I live at this historic site where we can all go now. It's owned by the state called Stagville. And I started going out there. They preserved a couple of the cabins that enslaved people lived in. They built them and they lived in them. And the first time I went out there, they told me that one family lived in one of them until the 1950s, passed down one generation to the next. You can still see the fingerprints of some of the enslaved people who made the bricks that they laid at the base of this large cabin that multiple families lived in. But I started going out there, and I started paying attention to how out behind the cabins, beyond the place where they cooked the food, there was a space down in the woods where people would gather after work, and started thinking about how the faith that was shared and cultivated in that space, the faith that sustained people through those horrors, those spaces where they sang, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Not just to hope that one day Jesus would save us all, but also to communicate that in the midst of this system that couldn't be changed immediately, there was going to be a train running on that Underground Railroad that would go out tonight. And if you wanted to get on board, you could. And in those spaces where hope was both about changing a system and also about getting as many people free as we can in the meantime, I began to realize that there is a faith that has been passed down one generation to the next. That, as a matter of fact, if you go back, I'm a member of a Black Baptist church in Durham, and we're part of an association of Baptist churches that has been there since the late 19th century. And when you go to the oldest churches in our association and you look at when they were founded, they were all founded in 1865 because that was the first time folks were able to come out of those hush harbors on the plantation and own property and gather together in public. But that church that moved from those edges and those marginal places where those freedom songs, spirituals were cultivated into those churches, that has been a center for reading the Bible and understanding this faith and understanding this place that we live and the democratic tradition that we've tried to cultivate in this place in a very different way. In a very different way. And people like Vincent Harding, who I mentioned, and Ann Atwater, who I got to know when I came to Durham, the Reverend William Barber, who became a mentor and began to teach me about the history of fusion politics in this state and the way that when we come together and form coalitions across these lines, there have always been people who've imagined a different kind of polity and a different kind of future for us, that this multi-ethnic democracy that Uncle Vincent used to ask us to have a democratic conversation about when we gather together in circles, it really is another tradition that we can all claim as our own. It's just as much a Christian tradition and just as much an American tradition as the Christianity and the nationalism that is held up against it often claims to be in our public square. So this book was in many ways about trying to articulate my own journey toward that. And so anyway, to close up my kind of contribution here and open up the conversation, I just wanted to read to you at the end of the book, I wrote a letter to my son and my grandpa because this conversation they had, which I kind of recount early on in the book and told to you earlier, had shaped my own sense of why I needed to tell this story. And so I wrote to them at the end. I don't know if any of y'all have written books, but it's kind of a long process. You write it down and you rewrite it, and then you send it to your editor, and there's a lot that happens after that. So anyway, I initially wrote this a year before the book came out, but as it happened, my grandfather died just 2 weeks before this book was published in the spring. And so one of the last things I did before I started talking to folks about this book was preach his funeral. The letter to him is now kind of a bridge between heaven and earth in a way, and in so many ways, I think this story is that. So let me share this with you. Dear Pa and Jamichael, sitting across from the two of you at dinner last Easter, I witnessed an impasse that is not uncommon in America. We hear almost every day that we live in a divided country, yet the dinner tables where we rub elbows across this acknowledged chasm are few and far between. We've always celebrated a determination to stick together despite disagreement, both in our family and in this nation. It's why we love Dr. King's I Have a Dream and Jesus's Love One Another as I Have Loved You. However real our differences, we hold on to hope that we have more in common than that which divides us. But the tug I felt in my gut as I watched the two of you struggling to understand each other was more than a worry that the experiment we know as America may not endure. Something between nausea and hunger, that feeling has returned in the dark of each morning as I've tried to build a bridge of words between your worlds, something to span the breach that racism created, a gulf that I feel at the center of myself. Pa, you taught me to sing the songs of faith. My grandfather was a Southern gospel musician. I often hear your tenor when the organ is playing in a church before the congregation begins to sing. I realized how deep those songs were in my spirit when you were a little boy, Jamichael. After I'd read to you each night, we'd say our prayers and turn out the light, and back then you always wanted me to stay, so you'd ask for a song. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, I started singing, and you wanted it every night. I passed on to you what was passed down to me. We are weary people in a wounded world, and Jesus is calling us home. I know it is true, and I've seen enough to trust that God can make a way out of no way to get us there. But we are not home yet, nor have we ever been. Most of the social sins that have been committed in our tortured history have been perpetrated by Christians. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, we say, and it is true. But we practice self-deception if we do not acknowledge that the worst of these sins were done in the name of God. From Easter Sunday at the Colfax Courthouse, which was the beginning of the redemption movement that overturned Reconstruction in the South. It began on an Easter Sunday when white men got up from their dinner tables and went to the courthouse and killed every one of the black folks who were there trying to defend the Democratic election of the previous year. From Easter Sunday there at the Colfax Courthouse to our family's Easter dinner, we are a people divided by faith. And while it is clarifying to distinguish between the religion of the slaveholder and the Christianity of Christ, the fact remains that there is nowhere we can go to learn and practice the pure and unadulterated Christianity of Christ. White supremacy has shaped us all, though in markedly different ways. Jamichael, you have no choice but to learn what it means to negotiate this world as a man who others see as black. Those who came before you stood tall to say that black is beautiful and that black people deserve the same political and economic power that all other people deserve in our world. You are the person God made you to be, and you must not let any person or institution lead you to think otherwise. But they will try over and again, because the same evil forces that tell you it's wrong to be black have spent centuries telling me and Pa and millions who resemble us that it's good to be white. Not only good, but godly. Whiteness, I have learned, is a religion. It is fueled by its power to give those who believe it a sense of worth. And for anyone who needs it, it is a faith that must be sustained in spite of the evidence. No one can be persuaded that the belief that tells them who they are isn't true. I know this from experience. But I have also known that friendship of brothers and sisters who love me out of the lie that is written across each of us. Most of them have been black. Their experience of white supremacy giving them a personal connection to the God who raised Jesus from the dead after raising Israel out of Egypt. But some have also been of a lighter hue. For the scriptures are true, our God is no respecter of persons. Even white people I've seen can be saved, but not on our own. Of this I am certain. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling us home. He has demonstrated his commitment by making a way out of no way through the cross. But we cannot follow Jesus to glory without accepting the new humanity of his body here and now. I've written this book for the same reason I'm writing to you, because I do not want to miss this gift, and I want to share it with both of you and all of our family who long for a better story that tells us who we are. I love you both. Jonathan, Dad. Thank you for letting me share. Let's have a conversation.
We've got a couple folks planted here in the middle to help break the ice. So again, the format here in this fishbowl is that these seats are open. You have the freedom to move, and if you have a hard time moving, if you'll stick your hand up, we'll come find you. But if you don't have a hard time moving, come on up and join us. And if you would try to direct your reflections or your questions to Jonathan, keep them fairly brief so we can keep the conversation moving and get as many folks as involved as we can. All right? Somebody going to start us off here?
Jonathan, when I finished your book, I was very discouraged. And I know your message is one of hope. But what came through to me pretty clearly is that everything that I had thought I was doing in church for all of my years had been contaminated. And I began to understand that although we've been working here on trying to improve our relationship with others in the community, this is a huge undertaking. And it's got to happen internally. We can't transform a congregation. We have to do it individually. And your testimony as to how this happened with you is very enlightening and inspiring. But I guess I would ask, as a member of this congregation, what steps, and I think tonight is the beginning, but what steps can you recommend for us to take, recognizing that it's got to happen with each of us individually, but we really should be doing it together, because only together, and with our partners at South Tryon and other churches in this community, can we begin to transform Charlotte.
No, thank you. I do think this is fundamentally about spiritual formation for Christians. And the image from the desert that Dorotheus of Gaza passed on is one that often comes to mind for me. Dorotheus said that the basic truth of the life of prayer is to recognize that the whole world is as if it were a circle and we on its circumference, and we are called to move closer to God. You see the picture here from this circle. But Dorothea said there's no way to move closer to God without moving closer to your neighbor, right? So I think to recognize the way that whiteness is a lie that has divided us in America is to see that that it's fundamentally a spiritual problem, right? I think churches have to grapple with this. It's fundamentally a spiritual problem that we've been divided from our neighbors. It's keeping us from God. Right? To stay out here is to, be unable to move closer to God. And so, in whatever ways we can, as individuals, as churches, I think you're right. It's a personal process. We got to engage it personally, but we do have to engage it as groups. There's no way this is going to change without groups of people changing, and it's not just about churches. It's also about schools and neighborhoods, and it's about our common life. It's about politics. I think the biggest lie whiteness ever told America was that faith isn't political. How could faith not be political? It's about, it says over and over, love your neighbor as you love yourself. How are you going to love your neighbor without engaging politics? I'm not saying that it's Republican or Democrat, but obviously it's political. Like the only reason we ever said it wasn't is because, that seemed like it was going to, get in the way of our economy. So to your question, I would say, I see a lot of hope in the church where I see people who have been in control of institutions, of, whether it's a local congregation or a, denomination or adjudicatory or whatever, people who've been in control saying, we've gotten a lot of stuff wrong. We don't know which way we need to go. It's not like we just need some new, it's not like we just need the newest thing to, get us there better. No, actually, we don't know that we're blind, right? That's the thing, we're blind. And so the first task for any institution, but certainly for the church, is to ask God, where are our friends who can help us find our way, right? And I've talked with John and Ron and others here about how y'all have been reaching out to other congregations, but I really do think that partnership has to be imagined as mutual discernment. And if you know that you're blind, it might look more like submission than discernment. But just listening to people who can tell you, no, actually, this is what matters in our city. And, as a group of people, this is what y'all could do to be helpful. One of the worst things that happened to white people in misreading the Bible was that white people began to think that the Bible told us that we should help other people. And in helping other people, we tried, unintentionally, I think, but just because this is the way the world was set up, we tried to find ways to help other people be as white as us, right? That's what a lot of the history of Christian missions in America is saying, oh, y'all, you poor folk, maybe you could be white too. If you,
I got it right.
So we, so we started residential schools, right? Or we gave those poor people a scholarship to our segregation academies. Or, we did this over and over and over again. And it was all a sort of invitation that and so it takes a serious reimagination of where we are for people who have had access to power to say, honest to God, we don't know what to do because we've been blind. We're going to have to ask people who know more than we do for help. I think we start there. Now, there's a lot more, but I think it's a place to start. Thank you for joining the circle.
Thank you. When I think about our country, I think about that blindness you're talking about. We think we're the good guys.
Yeah.
And yet we have a history of doing things we're absolutely wrong. Slavery, Reconstruction, the aftermath of Reconstruction, the dropping atom bomb on a civilian population and killing 200,000 Japanese, and fighting wars that have no meaning to us, like Vietnam and Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan. We think we're the good guys, but we don't face what's true about us. And if we're not living in truth, then we're not followers of Jesus. And so I think a lot of this comes down to an actual confession on an individual's part, on a group's part. Anyway, that's.
No, thank you. I never forget. I was in Iraq at the beginning of the current war in 2003, and was part of the first group of Westerners who came out of the country. And the first thing I did when I went to Amman, Jordan, was I went to a worship service that the local Christians had organized. And one of the bishops of the Eastern Orthodox Church was there, and he knew that we had just come out, and so he came and he said, his first question was, what are the Christians in America saying about this war? And I said, well, sadly, a lot of them think it's a righteous war. George Bush frames himself as a Christian. A lot of people, the churches are praying for success because they think it's, God's war. And I'll never forget just sort of confusion on his face. And, this big guy with a big beard, and he said, but haven't you read the scriptures? But I think, so often when we listen to people who aren't in the same position, we see this, right? We see that people see us very differently than we see ourselves, and that listening, well, we're not just blind, we're also deaf. And I think we've intentionally cut ourselves off from so much of the listening that we need. So, yeah, your call to a posture of repentance is one that I think, if I understand repentance in Scripture, is always about fundamentally us learning to hear God's voice again, right? And we certainly need to hear. Others have turns. Go ahead.
I need to say really quickly that you have a coral-colored piece of paper that was in your chair. Coral? That's that color. Salmon, coral, something like that.
It's more of a terracotta.
I was told coral. Okay. All right. And if you would, just while you're listening, if you would just jot down a response or two, we're going to use that in the prayer time that we're going to close with at the end. So if you have and if you've already used it, it's no big deal. But if you have a response or two, a single word, a short sentence, some way that you can respond to what you're hearing and what you've heard, then if you would jot that down, that'd be great. Okay.
We were talking about racial blindness and it's sort of inherited or generational. And the question I had, and I think you're implying there is a difference perhaps by age or generation. Do you see hope and a change in racial blindness based on age, perhaps more racial blindness with older folks that have lived through segregation or in segregation more, and perhaps less the younger folks are that perhaps have been in school together or communities together? Do you? I guess one reason I'm asking that, do you see hope in that potential differential between young and old?
Well, there's one very hard reality of demographics that, if not necessarily hopeful, is at least forcing a crisis. And that is that by 2040 or so, white people who, think they're white in this country, are going to be one among many minorities. That's just a demographic reality, right? That is a new thing, right? We've had white supremacy in this country that has depended on a white majority. And so we've been able to maintain at least the appearance of democracy and white supremacy side by side for two and a half centuries. That is not going to be possible. So it does seem to me that in the moment that we're living in, we are either going to have to learn how to become the country we've never been, or there are lots of other alternatives that many of which seem quite terrible. But I do have a lot of hope that it's possible, because we've seen it in our past, and we do see it in places where people are together. Real quickly, just one story. I, for a while, taught a writing group. I wasn't really a teacher, but I got to go because they said I was the teacher. But I got to be part of a writing group on the death row in North Carolina. And I learned something incredibly important there. And the best way to let you see it is to tell one story. So one day a guy wrote a story about an argument that they had that had broken out on a very important day in the prison, which is Fried Chicken Day. It happens once a month. They serve fried chicken. Everybody gets one piece of fried chicken. They were serving it. And on death row, when they get to go into the cafeteria area, they don't lift the hood. They don't lift it all the way up so you can actually see the people back there. They just lift it enough to slide the pans out. So they had slid the pans out, and everybody was supposed to get their one piece of fried chicken. And this one guy reached for his piece of fried chicken, and the person behind there pulled the pan back and said, "Everybody only gets one piece." And he said, "Oh, no, but I didn't get my piece." And they said, no, everybody has their piece. We counted. And this struggle ensued where he was holding onto this pan, and he wasn't going to let go, and they weren't going to let go. And the corrections officer who was out here with the guys told him he had to let go. And if he didn't let go, he was going to, go to the hole. And this other guy who was writing the story in our writing group says that he interjected and said, no, I saw he didn't get his piece. And the officer looks at him and says, "Look, you're going to the hole too if you don't shut up." And he said, no, really, this guy, and he says to the other guy, "If he says another word, handcuff him." And he said, "No, really." And they locked this guy up, and he ends his story with, "I spent the next 30 days in the hole." And I said, he stops. We're sitting in a circle like this, and we're going to respond. And I'm into this story because he was doing a good job telling it. But I said, "Over a piece of chicken?" And he said, "Oh, no. It was about a lot more than chicken." Because he said, "I'm a Muslim, and he's a Christian. And they always try to divide us by our religion. But I knew if I stood up for the Christian, they'd never be able to divide us. So I spent 30 days in the hole, so they knew they couldn't divide us." And I said, if the so-called worst of the worst have already figured out how Muslims and Christians can live together, I have some hope that we can figure this out. In the places where it's happened, including, some schools in our cities that actually are integrated, I do see hope. I think it's possible.
One thing that I've realized for white folks who are in this space is there tend to be two reactions that I've seen maybe folks fall off one side of the horse. Either there's this immense amount of guilt and they fall over themselves to make sure no person of color thinks they're racist. Or there's this massive sense of defensiveness, like, that wasn't me, I didn't do this, I didn't do this. It seems like you found a way to look differently. How did you come to a place where it's not an immense amount of guilt, where it's just like you are trying to compensate for everything that happened before, but there's also a reality that, this stuff happened. I am benefiting from these systems. What was that process like for you? And I know it's probably a complex question, but.
Yeah. No, thank you for asking. I'm the beneficiary of black love. I've been loved. I was loved by Grandma Ann Atwater, who, by the way, died a couple years ago, but before she died, she had become somewhat well known in our town because she was the most militant leader of the Black Power movement in Durham in the 1960s. But when they finally came, the federal folks came in to integrate schools in Durham. This guy, Bill Riddick, this is 1971, so, they had said all deliberate speed in 1954. Nothing makes Southern white people madder than telling them to hurry up. So it's 1971, and Bill Riddick came in, and he was trying to figure out, how we were actually going to desegregate the schools. And he was a brilliant guy. He said, well, the only way to do it is to get everybody together, and the way to get everybody together is to get the polar opposites to lead it. So he persuaded, through some negotiations, to get Ann to co-lead the process with this guy named C.P. Ellis, who had led the Ku Klux Klan in Durham. And they hated each other, and they had tried to kill each other. But after he, had told one that the other one was going to do it if they didn't, then they agreed to work together. And in the process of working together and listening to, actually hearing stories about one another's children, they realized that they had actually been pitted against one another, right? They were poor white folks and poor black folks, and none of their kids were getting a good education. And if they were in charge of the system, then they could imagine ways to do it so that everybody would get a better education. So it's a beautiful story, which is also, deeply painful. But that was Grandma Ann's experience. And I mention that because they've made it into a movie that's coming out next year, so you can see it. It's called The Best of Enemies. But people like her, people who knew that wrong was wrong and was going to be wrong until it got right. She wasn't going to play. She wasn't going to act like things were right. She wasn't going to be that, black person who goes along, tries to get some crumbs thrown. No, that was not her. She had learned black power. She knew power. She was going to work. But she had also learned in a way that that I think she, was able to see in me, that racism had hurt white people too, right? That there was a kind of spiritual poverty that I was recovering from when I met her, and she wanted to love me and many others into this freedom family. It's that kind of love that I think makes me feel like, guilt is a kind of weak thing compared to that. Once you've been loved, what does the Bible say? We love because God first loved us. Well, that's an abstract thing until you've actually been loved. And then, I think love's more powerful than guilt. And I think it's also more powerful than fear, which is what I think that defensiveness is basically about, right? The white folks who say, I never owned a slave. Some of my best friends are black. You know all the lines. All that's about being afraid, right? Who in the world would I be if I acknowledged that none of this is the way it is because I deserve it, or because, right? Like this, we have inherited a mess. But again, we're in the church, and the thing I want to say is that, like, this has helped me realize that this is what the Christian story is actually about, right? I didn't actually get the story until I realized that the particular kind of sin that I inherited is the sin that we call whiteness, right? Because the story says that the sin blinds you from even knowing that you're a sinner. So how in the world are you supposed to get saved? You've got to get knocked off your horse, like the Apostle Paul. Or you got to, that brother thought He was doing God's work when he was going to kill God's people. And in so many ways, that's the situation we find ourselves in, right? This kind of false righteousness that's tied up with this false sense of identity. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for asking that. How we doing on time? We got time to...
Yep, we got time for probably 2 minutes.
All right, so I don't know if I have a question more so than to bring something to awareness.
Please, yeah.
All right, so I'm a teacher and I have to teach about slavery.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that I can't stand inside of the books is that a group of people are called the slaves.
Yeah.
So I asked my students, I said, who are the slaves in the classroom? Then I asked my students who would be the master inside of the classroom.
Uh-huh.
But then I asked my students, I said, are you a slave? Or would you be a slave then? And they get a little confused with that question. Then I said, well, okay, let's change the name. And I say, what if we called you Doodoo Butt?
Uh-huh.
And I say, are you Doodoo Butt? And then I go into say, well, you wouldn't want to be called Doodoo Butt. Well, what if you were forced to be called Doodoo Butt? Consistently,
Right.
would you call yourself Doodoo Butt?
Yeah.
Or would you call yourself something else? Would you say that I am a human who was enslaved?
Yeah.
So the thing is I always try to bring it to their awareness that there was people who were enslaved, humans that were enslaved,
Right.
and people who enslaved. And that is a critical point. And I just want to bring that to your awareness because you said a point and you said the slave people. There's no slaves. Nobody would want to call themselves Doodoo Butt.
Oh, amen. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And I think what you're pointing to is the way that all of us can internalize this lie, right? That, yeah, enslaved people are constantly told this. Yeah, and in some ways, you see the spirit of resistance in, people who found themselves in that kind of situation, teaching one another to sing a song that said, before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. That's an act of defiance, right? They were singing to one another and to their God, just what you're saying. No, we're not slaves. We're people bought with a price. But I think you bringing it up, it's also important on the other side, like you were saying too, right? That people who, considered themselves owners. What does it mean to own another person? But this is something we can bring all the way up to the present, right? There's a strong culture in American society that says, to be a upstanding, good citizen is to be a property owner. What is the legal basis for property ownership in the United States of America? You can read the court law on this, but I learned this from a Native American friend. The legal basis of property ownership in the United States of America, no matter what color your skin, is the Papal Bull of 1493 that said Christians had a divine right to take the land from savages and to evangelize them. The Supreme Court cited this Papal Bull of 1493 for the last time in 2005, when its most liberal justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, wrote the opinion. That's something that all of us, if we own land, participate in. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like learning to question whether the names that we have, the language that we use, is even an honest description of what is. Because these habits that we're trying to just learn to see are written into language as much as they're written into practice. Yeah, thank you.
I think you've talked about how people in whiteness are kind of tied up with the sin of slavery, but I think the book is also about how the church is, and how the church is still sick in America. And how does the church change from being what I see as sort of continuing to get sicker and dying as the country goes to be this, it's the last vestige of defending kind of the old ways. If you look at the fact that 80% of evangelical Christians voted consistently in one way, in a political way. And if you look at that and you say, does the church need to die to lose power to become born again in the true church of Jesus?
Yeah. Yeah, well, Frederick Douglass said, between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I see the widest possible difference, right? He makes a distinction. He's, of course, pointing to a church that justified this practice of race-based chattel slavery, but there are lots of things you could point to today, not the least of which is a large portion of the mostly white church that has backed political extremism in this state and in the nation. I think to say that the church has to die in order for it to be born again is, of course, in one sense always true, but in another sense could reinforce this kind of linguistic thing we were just talking about, right? As if the church were, those people who claim Christianity and use it to prop up extremism. Well, that's one kind of Christianity. But again, there is and has always been another kind of Christianity, right? They surveyed pastors recently about approval of the current, political regime, and there was a 4% approval by black pastors. So, you can always buy a few off, but that's pretty, like 96% is pretty overwhelming. I think there's some basic insight that people who have experienced the evil and pain of white supremacy just see. They can just see it. And so in that sense, what I say to Christians, or people trying to be Christian, whatever, however well we're doing it, is that in this context, I think Christians, whatever the case, need to learn a lot from people who followed Jesus and been black. Like, that's incredibly important in this place. We've got to listen to that experience. That doesn't mean that, everybody's going to join black churches, God forbid, those poor churches. Like, it would be a curse. But in a very real way, I think we have to change our center of where we look for direction, for wisdom. I thought it was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful thing when Bishop Michael Curry preached at the royal wedding, and people were just sort of like, "Oh, wait, what is it?" And I knew Bishop Curry when he was here. He's a great preacher. He was our bishop, Episcopal bishop of North Carolina before he was the bishop for the national church. But I just thought, that's pretty standard black preaching. Most people could go hear that in their town. At the AME Zion Church, at the AME Church, at the, Baptist church down the street. I'm glad the Royals thought that was important to hear, but we could all learn from that regularly. It's not like an exceptional thing. So that would be a place to begin, I think, to just invite the church. I was delighted to see on this paper here that Austin is going to be, is she here? She's going to be here in a few months. Austin's written a great book about what it means to be black in white-dominated church spaces. Her book's called I'm Still Here. I mean, so many voices like hers that are trying to speak directly to churches that have been, dominated by whiteness. Drew Hart is another great voice writing specifically for the church today out of his experience. Tracy Blackman, wonderful preacher, speaking both to the church and to our public life. I could go on and on, but like we have voices ready to teach us. There is, there's a whole tradition. I'm so glad to know that this church has connected with Hood Seminary, which is right up the road here, and has been a center for, there are only 6 seminaries based in historically black institutions in the country. Because again, it takes a lot to have the resources to be able to have a school and bring together a library and a faculty and all that takes. But one of them is right up the road here. It goes all the way back to J.W. Hood, who wrote the Constitution of North Carolina that we still have, that people swear to uphold, even though they're doing a terrible job, most of them. They swear to uphold the Constitution that J.W. Hood helped to write in 1868. He waxed eloquent about the language that Jefferson had put in the Declaration. In no wise romanticizing Jefferson. He knew Jefferson had been a slaveholder. But he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, endowed with their Creator by certain inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty. He added this, the just fruit of one's labor and the pursuit of happiness. It's a constitutional right in North Carolina to earn the just fruit of your labor, because that man knew people who had been enslaved. I mean, that's a powerful thing. Yeah.
We're going to move to action.
All right.
So
what are we going to do?
Yeah, we're going to do something. So Charlotte is notorious for having panel discussion after panel discussion after task force after panel discussion with lots of people asking what can we do, and then coming back to the next panel discussion and asking the same questions. So we're not going to do that this time. You have an orange, coral, peach piece of paper at your seat, and there are pens all over the place. Ask a friend to borrow one if you need one. And there's a box you can pass around with the pens in them. Take a moment and think about what resonated with you, and begin to jot some notes down on one side of the piece of paper in your own handwriting in a way that you can read it, but you don't have to worry about anybody else reading it yet. A couple months ago, Walter Brueggemann was in town, and our city planner was talking in a panel discussion with him, and our city planner, or I don't know, it might be called assistant city planner, was talking about how economic investment and development had come in so fast that the city just could not keep up, and so that is why there was such a boom that just sort of took over. And Brueggemann asked, well, what could you do to fix that? And you could tell that the assistant city planner was afraid and didn't have an answer. And he said, well, wouldn't that be a practice of reparation? So the reason that you feel like you want to do something or ask about doing something is because you want to help repair the problems or reconstruct, or you want to be reconstructed. So journal as I'm talking about your thoughts and what resonates. And then see if one word can be distilled from that journaling. Just one word. On the other side of the piece of paper, write the one word, and this time write in a way that anyone could read it. This is going to be your declaration, your prayer, and we're going to speak them aloud. So once you've distilled your action, your sense of call, what resonates with you, the place, the moment when you say, yes, this is what I'm here for this, your amen moment, write it one word on the piece of paper, legibly, and there's a basket that's going to be passed around like an offering plate, and you're going to offer this word, this commitment we're going to offer it to each other in a moment aloud. The basket's coming around.
So as we're doing that, just a couple of words about this evening and how we'll close out. So a big thank you to Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove for joining us from Durham. So you see that there are a couple of action items for you on each chair in this little blue handout. And so there are a number of things to sign up for, a number of things to read or pay some attention to. So we would ask you to pay close attention there and govern yourselves accordingly. And then secondly, Jonathan is going to be at the table out here with copies of Reconstructing the Gospel and the opportunity to sign those. They are available for purchase. I should tell you that Jonathan wrote the foreword for my new book.
It's a good book. It's a good book. This is a jazz artist here. He doesn't have a saxophone tonight, but he's doing some riffs in that book. Good stuff.
Yep. So the book these copies are hot off the press. It has just been released. So I'm going to sit out there with Jonathan. The book is available here at Park Road Books and the other places online that you buy books, and would welcome the chance to talk to you a little bit about that as well. All right. So the basket is still moving around.
Are we going to sing Yara's song?
We are.
Let me tell folks real quickly the story of the song. We're going to sing a song that a great song leader of the moral movement and a good friend, Yara Allen, wrote. But I love to sing it because she wrote it when she came to my home county, Stokes County, North Carolina, and listened to the stories of people who've been poisoned by coal ash that was put into ponds by the Duke Energy plant up there and has been sitting above the groundwater, and it's heavy metals seeping into the groundwater there for decades now. And she was just listening to the testimony of people who have been harmed by that. Their kids have had terrible health effects from it. And she said she just heard a voice saying, "Somebody's been hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long." And so she started singing that, and it's kind of become an anthem over these last couple of years of the Poor People's Campaign that has been revived and is organizing all across the land. There are some folks organizing for the Poor People's Campaign here in Charlotte who you could certainly join. But you can also learn more at poorpeoplescampaign.org. But I think we're going to sing that song together. So let's do it. It goes like this. Go ahead. Somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. Oh, it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Hurting my sister. Oh, somebody's hurting my sister, and it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. Oh, it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting my sister, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Poison in the water. Somebody's poisoning the water, and it's gone on far too long. Gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent anymore. One more time. And we won't be silent anymore.
So those who were among the panel earlier, that like the initial people that were up here, could y'all come back? We're all going to take some of these. And remember that last phrase of the song, and we won't be silent anymore. One of us is going to read several of the pages, and then when they stop reading, we're all going to sing together, and we won't be silent anymore. And this is our prayer lifting up, that we are praying this, communicating this to God, saying that this is our commitment, this is what we are willing to do and to act, and we'll at least try. We won't allow fear to keep us from doing the things that we're called to do.
Bridge, risk, relearn, love, healing, acknowledgement, relationship.
And we won't be silent anymore.
Love, 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 healing, consideration, truth. Spend more time with people of other races. Work to create racial opportunities for others. Relationship, disruption, love, hope. Know your neighbor. Walk in the shoes of your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Love. Love is more powerful than guilt and fear.
And we won't be silent anymore.
Honesty, rebirth, love, good.
And we won't be silent anymore.
Neighbors, listen. Discomfort with pause moments. Break the chaos. I can't read that, sorry. Break the chaos. Confused. Bridge. Love. Submit. Emancipation. Hopeful. Commit to visiting South Tryon Church regularly. Talk. Acceptance. Enlightenment. Leadership needed, accountability, and a sense of urgency. And beginning.
And we won't be silent anymore.
Open, unselfish, pray, love, learn, acceptance, willing, listen, repair, listen, relationship, repentance and humility, live with truth and love for everyone.
And we won't be silent anymore.
Mercy, anti-bubble, act, learn, listen. And we won't be silent anymore.
Thank you, Lord, for hearing our prayer. Embolden our steps. Keep compelling us to be more of who you want us to be. In Christ's name, amen.